Welcome back inside the Now Morning Show. Yes, Shadow City Easy Tension, and this morning we're talking about managing hypertension and salt intake. To do so, let me welcome Dr. Hazel Thompson, District Medical Officer at the TRHA, and Ronique Thomas, Dietitian at the Community Nutrition Unit of the TRHA. Good morning, ladies, and welcome to the Now Morning Show.
Hi, good morning.
How are we doing this morning? We all right?
Yes, quite fine.
Excellent.
Lovely. Dr. Thompson, let me start with you. I wanted to get a basic definition of hypertension and how we diagnose it.
Okay, so a basic definition for hypertension or high blood pressure, we'll just separate it into two parts. So we look at blood pressure. So blood pressure is the force that the blood exerts on the walls of the vessel. So high blood pressure means there's an elevated or sustained force of blood being exerted on the walls of the vessels, right? So if we are looking by hypertension has two values. We have systolic, which happens when the heart contracts, and diastolic, which happens when the heart relaxes. So you always have two numbers when you're looking at blood pressure. So a normal blood pressure would be a value of less than 120 systolic over less than 80 diastolic. That is normal. Less than 120 over less than 80. Next, we move on to elevated blood pressure. And elevated blood pressure would be a blood pressure with the systolic being between 120 to 129 over a diastolic that is less than 80. So when we're looking at staging hypertension, you have stage 1 hypertension, which is a value of systolic 130 to 139 over a diastolic between 80 to 89. And stage 2 hypertension would be blood pressure where the systolic is equal to or more than 140 and the diastolic is equal to or more than 90. So I just want to bring it into a little bit of layman's context because these numbers may be arbitrary to a lot of people. When you think about like a pipeline, think about water flowing on a pipeline. If there's you have normal pressure coming to your house, you have good flow, everything is working well, there's no difficulties. But if water opens up the pipeline extremely high, then you will have elevated or high blood pressure.
All right, that's fair. That's a pretty fair explanation of it, and I think you broke it down nicely there for us. But in terms of, I saw you had normal, elevated. Is it that we can all get to that elevated stage before we get to the hypertension stage?
Yes.
Okay.
So
and the elevated
sorry?
I just checking to make sure the elevated rate is not something that we should be concerned about. We should only be concerned when it gets to that third one.
You should be concerned once it's elevated as well. You should be concerned once it's not normal. So when it's elevated, this is for you to check yourself and say, what can I do differently that can bring me back into the normal range? So anything that is elevated would be concerning.
All right. And this is a perfect opportunity for Ronique to jump in here and tell us exactly how or what role, rather, does nutrition play in terms of controlling your blood pressure, in terms of controlling, preventing even getting to that place of elevated or hypertension?
Okay, so nutrition actually plays quite a fundamental role. We have long since known that, excess salt consumption is directly linked to hypertension. So the encouragement is always, when you think about high blood pressure or hypertension, as we call it, you always hear that recommendation of reduce your salt intake, reduce the amount of salt that you're cooking with and that sort of thing. But, reducing the salt intake is not the only thing that we encourage persons to do as it relates to hypertension. The overall quality of the diet is important and plays a part. So you now look at, how much processed and ultra-processed foods you're consuming. You look at the nature of your diet in terms of how much fruits, how much vegetables, and that sort of thing you are consuming every day. So reducing the salt intake, of course, and then, of course, paying attention to the overall quality of the diet. But yes, nutrition plays quite a fundamental role.
All right. So then tell me, Dr. Thompson, what are some of the risk factors associated with hypertension?
Okay, so risk factors, when we look at them, we divide them up into two categories. We have modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. Modifiable, non-modifiable risk factors is just basically things that you can't change about yourself. We're all aging. I'm older today than I was yesterday. So as you age, that increases your risk of hypertension. There is genetics association with high blood pressure. So if your granny, your auntie, your mommy, everybody in your direct family line has high blood pressure, then you may be at increased risk of hypertension. And if you have like other diseases such as diabetes or chronic kidney disease, which you can't get rid of, then you also may be at increased risk of hypertension. But there are always things that we can do. And those things are the modifiable risk factors. So as Ronique was explaining, the amount of salt that you consume on a daily basis, we recommend it to be less than 1 teaspoon of salt. We look at also the fat that you intake, specifically trans fat. We definitely want to reduce that in your diet. We have more because we are more in an industrialized society. We tend to be a little bit more lethargic in our movement. So we want to encourage people to exercise, at least aiming for 150 minutes of exercise weekly. And that could be broken down any which way you want to break it down, which could be 30 minutes, 5 days out of the week. This morning you could wake up and just feel to do 10 minutes. That's okay. If you have an elevated BMI, which is more than 25, then you also want to reduce that value as well. So weight loss helps in terms of reducing your blood pressure. Definitely, if you smoke, we want you to give up smoking. And for those who are around people who smoke, secondhand smoke also causes your blood pressure to be elevated. And if you consume alcohol, we definitely want you to decrease the amount of alcohol that you consume and or stop alcohol in totality. And as Ronique was saying, we advocate for a DASH diet. Right, so we want you to increase your fruits and vegetables, at least having more than 5 fruits and vegetables daily. So those are the risk factors that we can change in our daily lifestyle that can help reduce the risk of getting hypertension.
Now, when we talk about high blood pressure and we talk about hypertension, we always hear, the things like reducing your salt intake, stop smoking, stop drinking alcohol. Is there a way that you can do those things in moderation and still be okay, or is it that we need to stop completely? Let me throw that one for you, Ronique.
Okay, so from the dietary aspect or the dietary part of things, we always tend to, encourage moderation. And one of our mottos is, moderation is key. But the thing about encouraging moderation is, saying moderation is quite subjective some of the time. So one person's idea of what moderate is and another person's idea of what moderate is always turns out to be quite different. But yes, we still encourage persons. Nothing is wrong, with the occasional, in terms of the diet-related aspects, nothing is wrong with, having occasional treats. That is why we say 80% of the time as it relates to nutrition, if you're eating a balanced diet, you're watching your salt intake, you're getting your fruits and your vegetables and all these different things. The occasional instance where you may attend a social gathering, you may have a family event or something of that nature, and you may eat outside of what you usually do, that would not cause any gross or serious changes, right? So we always encourage moderation.
Ronique, I have to also ask, in terms of the salt intake, are there specific types of salt that are more harmful than others? And also, is it different for people who have a more active lifestyle? For example, I know like if you're playing sports and you get cramps, they tend to give you a salt prune or tell you that your salt is running a little bit low, so that might be the trigger for why you're getting cramps, etc. Can you help me out with that one a little bit?
Okay, so in terms of the different type of salts, and this is one of the common myths or misconceptions that persons usually have, because there is this ongoing thing that, okay, if I buy pink Himalaya, if I buy some other fancy type of salt, that this one is better than the other one and I can go ahead freely using this one. The LD, it's a mineral and it's composed of different things. So when you have the sodium aspect of the salt is what plays the role in causing the blood pressures to be elevated. So all these different salts that we tend to be comparing, many of them do also contain sodium. So the thing is that moderation has to play a part in all of them. We have to limit the consumption of all of them and not just, okay, table salt, the white salt, and okay, it's fine to use the pink salt. No, we still have to limit the use of all the different ones. And I think for the other aspect of the question that you were asking, I think it plays along in terms of, if we actually need salt, because salt is important for different functions in the body. And as you were mentioning before, some persons would experience different things like cramping and all those different things if their sodium intake is low. It's all about balance and making sure that there is a balance. So it's not to say that sodium is completely unimportant and we need to cut it out completely. But we do need to look at reducing the intake and the consumption, because what the research is showing is that we do get enough from the foods that we eat. The problem now is we're getting too much. It's now in a state where it's even double or triple the amount that we're actually supposed to be having. And I think Dr. Thompson mentioned before in terms of how much 2,300 milligrams per day and that sort of thing. We're actually tripling that amount. So we do need to pay attention to that intake and to try to limit consumption.
All right. So thank you very much for that clarity there. Dr. Thompson, before we wrap up, I just wanted to touch a bit on the organ damage that can be done by hypertension and high blood pressure.
Okay, so hypertension is one of the leading causes of mortality and morbidity within Trinidad and Tobago. So when we talk about end organ damage, we look at the cardiovascular system, we look at the heart, and you know that think about the pipeline again. If you have elevated blood pressures, it can cause damage to the walls of the vessels, and that could cause significant narrowing. Blood is essential to get nutrients, oxygen, things that are vital to cells to help them to keep healthy. So when you limit or restrict the amount of blood flow going to the heart, this is when people start getting chest pains, or if it comes completely blocked, this is where it can lead to something called a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. The same thing with the blood vessels leading to the brain. If it's completely occluded, you could get an ischemic stroke, or if the pressure is so high and the blood vessel bursts, you could get a hemorrhagic stroke. At the level of the kidneys, we also see that if the vessels supplying the kidneys are also damaged, you could end up in renal failure, as well as damage behind the vessels of the eye. So we can't live without our heart, we can't live without our brain, and we can't live without our kidney. So the impact of hypertension is significant on the body.
Thank you, ladies, so very much for joining us this morning and for sharing this information. I think definitely one of the things we have to take away is to make sure and keep up to date and check yourself regularly, but also balance your intake. Thank you very much for sharing some light with us, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Have a great day. That's Dr. Hazel Thompson, District Medical Officer at the TRHA, and Ronique Thomas, the Dietitian in the Community Nutrition Unit at the TRHA.